Hey, Canada, are you sick of central planning and government yet? If not, well, you got a whole lot more patience than I do. Anyways, the time will come eventually. We'll all get sick of it. Well, I guess except those that benefit from it, right? That's really, if you think about it, in every country, in this every modern Western democracy, that is the divide nowadays. That is the political divide. Is those who benefit and gain from central planning and governments, forced subjugation and slavery, and those who are penalized, punished, and oppressed as a direct result and consequence of central planning and governments. But the ones that are penalized, that's the catch-22, right? Is those who are penalized, punished, and oppressed are the ones that actually provide all the true productive capacity, wealth, and prosperity in every one of our countries. Recognize and realize that fact. Headline: Financial Post. Canada's economy is growing at the slowest pace in 60 years, and the only thing holding us up is housing. Housing. You know that housing bubble? I've been saying that to people long before even this article come out. I've been telling people all the time out in public, in the workplace, friends, family. I keep telling them, think about it. The only reason, even when I was working, or my wife, she works in retail and stuff, like, with all this consumption and consumerism that happens all the time, that takes place, that keeps the system hum along. If you think about it, I always, now, I was just guessing, right? I didn't have all the 100% facts in front of me. Well, not actually, I shouldn't say guessing. A very well-educated guess, because I'm in the know as far as understanding things. I'm pretty prudent about knowing all the pieces of the puzzle, right? But even I said, well, how is it that because we know the economies, how bad they are, how are the people, the lowly masses, how are they still continuing to sustain this level of consumption and this growth in GDP, even if it's pretty minuscule, as we all know? How's that happen? Well, if you think about it, other than like those in government, central planners, the cronies or corporatists, those people still have lots of wealth because central banks have been giving them money almost for free, right? But the lowly masses, which make up the largest bulk of the economy, I was like, what it is, if you think about it, and I thought about it, is with this housing bubble, if you own a home and you have a line of credit, which most people do nowadays, like, think about it, everybody lives off of debt and credit. Their wealth is not real wealth, it's just debt and credit, right? But if your house, say you have a house in a lot of these big cities that are massively overvalued or valued, if you think about it, if your house gains in just 1 year, so like, I mean, think about it, in Ontario, places where you have like double-digit inflation as far as prices and speculative values of these homes, well, every year that means you get an extension on your credit card, right? Your line of credit. Just like a credit card, just like a bank, when they call you up and say, hey, I tell you what, or if you call and ask them, instead of a $5,000 limit, I'd like a $7,500. Oh, okay, yeah, I suppose we'll extend you that. The housing market, it does the exact same thing. These increased speculative valuations, so if your house is worth another $25,000, $30,000 in the run of a year, well, that means you can now borrow another $25,000 or $30,000 against that home. That, to me, and that was a light bulb moment for me, and I kind of understood that intrinsically, or instinctively, I mean, that, yeah, that's how this is all going. Because like I said, my mind is just constantly just churning and churning and churning and churning away, trying to figure things out. I'm a thinker. I love to think about things. But that, when I thought about that, it was, like I say, it was like a light bulb moment. Yes, of course, because I know lots of people that do use that as a means to get by. Lots of them. And it's just a matter of putting 2 plus 2 together. It's like, well, yeah, that's how they're maintaining this whole thing, is as the housing valuations are increased and the credit they're afforded to the people that own these houses or buying into these houses, well, they're getting expanded credit, right? If the bubble's being That bubble's being pumped up and pumped up and pumped up. But like I said, at some stage, somebody's going to have to say, hey, it's time to start ponying up, right? Or, hey, we got to cut you off here. Where you're the level that you're exposed to, your exposure to debt is at extremely heightened levels. That, yeah, warning, 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 which is what you're seeing today, like I said. Let me read the headline again, because I know I went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but Canada's economy is growing at the slowest pace in 60 years, and the only thing holding us up is housing. The only thing holding us up. What a headline article. Canada is in the midst of one of its weakest expansions ever, and only the housing boom keeps it from getting worse. That's one of the key takeaways from Friday's GDP report. 2 years since oil prices started plunging, Canada's economy is almost completely reliant on growth on bank lending and the hot Vancouver and Toronto housing markets generating fees for brokers almost entirely. Real estate and financial services now account for 20% of the economy. 20% of the economy. Holy Jesus, people. Think about that. 20% of the economy. Levels not seen in the data since the early 60s. That could be a problem. And that's the thing. If you go back to those 60s times when they're talking about, nobody was near as massively in debt because central planners back then would never allow things to get so out of hand, so out of control. They realized that you had to keep that contained to a certain degree because they remembered the whole, well, they were that much closer to the Great Depression. They understood, right? But in the modern age, in the modern era, this new massively inflated bubble, it's almost 100 years. What? 80, 90 years since the Great Depression. So a lot of people don't really understand that. The kind of information isn't passed down to everybody, right? With household debt at a record and policymakers scrambling to slow price gains that are making homes unaffordable for all but the wealthiest buyers. And that's another thing. Back then too. That, in the 60s, think about who would have been in debt. Would have been whoever the father of the family, because women weren't really necessarily into the workforce at gigantic amounts. I mean, some were because of that went into manufacturing and stuff like that because of World War II, but it was not nearly as rampant then, and it was not nearly as entrenched where you had both parents in a household being wage slaves and serfs to the ruling class, right? It's disturbing stuff. Let me read on. While Bank of Canada policymakers expect a sharp second half rebound as oil production resumes and exports pick up, some investors are hedging their bets. Swaps trading suggests an almost 30% chance Governor Stephen Polas will cut interest rates by the October meeting to give the economy another jolt. I mean, we're at like 0.5% for interest, and they think by dropping it down 0.25%. I mean, only one thing about it. If you're a lowly mass or just a person, like just a regular person in Canada, would a 0.25% interest rate rise or drop make a dramatic difference for you? Obviously not. These are people that are talking about the cronies, the corporatists, the big banks. That's the only people that can, because they trade and speculate in gigantic amounts, right? A 0.25% point for them does make a big difference. For the lowly masses, the regular people, shrug that off. At the very least, the economy's lethargy will add urgency to efforts by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Finance Minister Bill Morneau to holster long-term growth ahead of the 2017 budget. Based on Friday's report, here's what else we know about how Canadian economic output has changed over the past 2 years. Since May 2014, Canada's economy has expanded 1.2%. So that's 2 years. May 2014, over 2 years. That's the slowest 2-year pace outside a recession in at least 6 decades. according to Statistics Canada. Statistic Canada's monthly data back to the early 1960s. Until recently, the country typically mustered growth of at least 5% over 2 years, which was 2.5% per year. This is 0.6% per year, per annum. Over the past 10 months, Canada's economy has stalled altogether with zero growth. That is mostly due to Alberta's wildfires, no it's not, in May shutting down oil production, but there appear to be deeper forces at play. Averaging GDP over 3 months in order to reduce the effect of the wildfires still produces the same result, the worst 2-year expansion outside of a recession in decades. Like I said, no it doesn't. But they won't just, oh man. When they write articles, it's like they just try to be like lawyers and reporters at the same time. Propagandists, lawyers, and reporters, right? I don't know how they try to fucking function in that environment. I wouldn't want nothing to do with it. Oh, the freedom to be able to speak freely and not be beholden to any, authority that imposes their fucking shit on me and that I have to fucking spew it just because I need my job. Oh, I'm so glad I don't have nothing to do with that shit. But basically, yeah, they're saying. I mean, and even think of it, Canada. The Great Recession of 2008 till now, nothing has even, every time there has been a big, gigantic, dip, right? A correction in people's bad habits and behaviors, things have eventually, in due time, started to ramp up and people began being more prosperous fairly shortly. But the two times that has never happened is the Great Depression and now the Great Recession. Why? What are the big factors and coincidences involved in those two scenarios? Central planners, central banks intervened to a huge degree to think that they could centrally plan, control, and manipulate reality. Well, just like in World War, or just like after the Great Depression, it took a world war to be able to, like I say, you can't even get into the fact that North America or the U.S. was the only large, gigantic Western power that didn't have their entire infrastructure destroyed, and they were, after the Bretton Woods Agreement and oil being traded and priced in U.S. dollars. I mean, like I say, that's the only reason why World War II and all this bullshit is the only thing that helped them to get out of the doldrums. But I mean, what we want to go through a world war? Actually, that's the thing. Back then, if you look at the level of debt, even back then, it was minuscule in comparison to what we're experiencing today. So there's no more tools. There's no more tools left in the arsenal for these people. I mean, a very few actually, but those have way worse unintended, or maybe intended consequences and negative ramifications than they do have in positive attributes. Even with this helicopter thing. I mean, yeah, sure, you might be able to fucking, it's just, that's kind of an analogy, but helicopter money, and look it up, they're talking about it all the time. But do you really think that that's going to help? They know damn well that would be the final nail in the coffin. That's your last go. That's your last round in the end game. Helicopter money. Kicking the can down the road, I mean, that's when you've broken your toe and you can't even kick it anymore. Oil industry. Output of mining companies, oil and gas producers, and their support sectors plunged 11% or 14% in May from the same month 2 years earlier. Averaged over 3 months, the decline is only 9%. Excluding the May figures, oil production has held up relatively well in volume terms, even with the oil price drop. The same can't be said for investment into new capacity. Engineering-related construction, closely associated with oil company investment, is down 21% over that time. The decline in resource production, coupled with the fall in engineering works, has shaved about 1.7% of the Canadian GDP in the 2 years through May, according to Bloomberg calculations. Once again, even manufacturing. You hear all especially the Liberals or the Quebec government, all these idiots, yeah, we're doing this to So bailing out, Chrysler, GM, Ford, Bombardier. I mean, all these big, gigantic fucking corporations that are worth billions and billions of dollars, where they're stealing from the lowly tax wage slaves in Canada to prop these up. But even then, what has been the final benefit, the result of it? One of the big economic mysteries for Canadian policymakers has been manufacturing's recent poor performance in spite of a weaker exchange rate. So yeah, they've even made your dollar worth less, your purchasing power even less than with inflation and these ridiculously low interest rates. But yeah, like, manufacturers have had their worst month in May since the recession, so back in 2008, with factory output down 2.4%. So yeah, all this bullshit is not working, is it? It's not working at all, is it? A big part of that monthly decline is temporary, led by a 13% drop in refinery output because of the oil supply disruptions. But even averaging over the last 3 months produces just a 1% gain for manufacturing over 2 years, which is slower than the rest of the economy. Jobs data shows a similar trend. The sector has lost 30,000 jobs over the past 2 years. So how is that even close to a net gain? I suppose if it's less than the amount of losses you had prior to that, you could consider it a gain. But it's still a loss. Real estate. The biggest contributor to Canada's growth since oil prices began their decline is real estate. The sector was 6.8% of or larger, or 6.8% larger in May from 2 years earlier, adding about 0.8% to the national GDP over that period. That's pretty much in line with growth rates over the past 15 years for a sector that even escaped the 2008-2009 recession, largely unscathed. Real estate has become the country's biggest industry at 12.4% of GDP, or 13.2% if you include leasing. So, like I said, that goes into it, and the rest is just financial services, retail, and public administration, like government workers. Yes, government workers is on the increase, but do they produce anything in the real economy that we actually need, that we, humans actually need to function? No, nope, nothing. So it's still always a net negative. And what they're basically saying is these speculative housing markets is the only thing that's keeping Canada's engines humming along. Even though it's barely at an idle, just lumping along because of all this shit, and because we know the potential and the ramifications of doing such, and what the potential, or not just potential, but the expected and realized outcome of all that will be. Things aren't looking good, Canada. The proof, I mean, there's so much now that just keeps telling us all that all the stuff that you hear from your political propagandists, your pundits, and your media morons, those that want to keep the system hum along just a little bit longer, all that stuff, just hold on, we come up with a whole new deal, and now we're going, just watch next month, it'll get better. Oh, no, next month it'll get better. Next month it'll get smaller. Next month. 8 years later, and you're hearing the same thing. I mean, now you're starting to see where they're finally starting to acknowledge and realize that, maybe we shouldn't keep pounding on that same pulpit, right? Nobody's listened to us. We've cried wolf so many times. Who's listening anymore? I sure as fuck. I haven't been listening. Well, listening, but taking anything what they say at face value, not for a long time. I see they're finally starting to come around a little bit. That should tell you. That should be a warning sign for anyone. That when even the central planners or those in the media are starting to even slightly report how things are getting bad. that should tell you a whole lot. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.